Welcome to the sanctuary of Progressive Baptist Church, where the word of the gospel is taught in life application form. Thank you for being in our midst today by sound and by word, and may God continue to find favor in your life.
Oh, and the eagle, oh yes, they shall run and not get weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, how to wait. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up like wings of an eagle. Oh yeah, they shall run and not get weary. They shall walk and not faint. Teach me, Lord, how to wait. Know that Job was safe so long in the flesh fell from his throne. Job had children, everything he had was gone. No matter, I will surely wait. Teach me, Lord, 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 hey, how to wait. If it had not been for the Lord on my side, tell me where would I be? Where would I be if it had not been for the Lord on my side? Tell me where would I be? Where would I be? 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter, beginning with the 33rd verse. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 33. If you have it, say amen. Amen. If you don't have it, say wait on me, brother.
Wait on me, Lil.
Amen. I'm waiting. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 33. And the word of the Lord is as follows. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the fold. And I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37, David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hands of his Philistine. And Saul said, go verse 45 for me, will you? Okay. I'm going to drop down to verse 45. Okay. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver me into mine hand. I will smite thee and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistine this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Yeah. Amen. As you're on your way to your seat, say, neighbor, 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 neighbor. God specializes in the impossible. And if I had to use for a short subject, I'd talk to you very briefly on the subject. God specializes in the impossible. Amen. Have you ever faced a situation that seemed impossible? Maybe you wanted to buy a house with no down payment and no closing costs. Or maybe you wanted to trade in your smoking hooping for a new Mercedes. Or maybe you wanted to honor a financial pledge to your church that you made when you had a job. Situations that seem impossible come up in our lives from time to time. But Progressive, I've come to tell you this morning that God specializes in the impossible. Some people enjoy pursuing the impossible. When Walt Disney called a board meeting to unveil a new idea, he never pursued the idea unless his board was unanimously in disagreement. You heard it right. His naysaying board challenged him, and Walt Disney considered the possible to be too easy and not worthy of his own creative talent. Automobile genius Henry Ford once came up with a revolutionary plan for a new kind of engine, the one we know today as the V8. Ford was eager to get his great new idea into production. But when he presented the plans to his engineers, they studied the drawings and they all drew the same conclusion. Their visionary boss just didn't know about the fundamentals and the principles of engineering. Somebody would have to tell him gently that his dream was impossible. Ford's reply was, produce it anyway. They replied, but Mr. Ford, it's impossible. Go ahead, Ford commanded, and stay on the job until you succeed. No matter how much time is required. So for 6 months they struggled with drawing after drawing, design after design, and still nothing. Another 6 months, nothing. And at the end of the year, Ford checked with his engineers and they had the same response. Mr. Ford, it's impossible. Henry Ford replied, keep going. Well, you know the rest of the story. I'm sure some of you here today have driven a car with a V8 engine. Years ago, and purely as a joke, the new engineers in the left division of General Electric were assigned the impossible task of frosting a light bulb on the inside. But what they did not know was that an undaunted newcomer by the name of Marvin Pipkin was not the type to give up easily. Not only did he find a way to frost the bulbs on the inside, but he developed an acid that actually strengthened each bulb. Fortunately for us, no one told him it was a joke and that it could not be done, so he did it. Most of us enjoy our light and today because of this being frosted on the inside to produce a softer light. Man has a general rule, and man sometimes does not think beyond his own capacity to understand. If we cannot see it, then it must not be able to be done. If we don't understand it, then there is no explanation. If we cannot envision it, then it must be impossible. But what makes a situation seem impossible is our own limited thinking. But there are those among us who are able to see beyond man's limited intelligence. And the trust of powers greater than their own. Such was the case of a little boy named David. You all know the story of David and Goliath. How David slew Goliath with nothing more than a slingshot in the story. But not so fast. There's more to examine than just the major points. The real story is in the details. For starters, David's father, Jesse, had a total of 8 sons. And David was the youngest and the smallest. When Samuel heeded to God's instruction to go to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, to anoint the king of Israel, Samuel could have analyzed his options through his own limited vision. He could have chosen any one of the more large and more fierce-looking sons of Jesse to lead a warring nation against the Philistines. But Samuel came to Bethlehem with only one intention. And that intention was to listen to God and anoint God's choice for a king. And so young, small, innocent, and fair David was revealed as God's choice. Have you ever faced that kind of situation? Have you ever received something that you were sure someone else deserved more? Yeah. Maybe you got a promotion that you were sure someone else was more deserving, or a scholarship, or a bonus, or an award. But beloved, there's a reason why you were the recipient of God's favor. There's a reason why God chose David to be the next king of Israel. God sees what we do not see, and David may have been small, but he was single-minded in his faith in God. He did not doubt God's love for Israel or God's ability to save Israel from its oppressors. David may have been small, but David was determined. David knew that what he could not do, God could do, because God specializes in the impossible. You see, after David was anointed king, he was sent back into the fields to tend to his father's sheep. His three oldest brothers went to battle with Saul against the Philistines. And one day, David's father Jesse told him to bring some food to the front lines for the king and for his brothers. And while David was there, he heard this great big Philistine named Goliath issue out a challenge to the armies of Israel. The challenge was that Israel would send out its fiercest warrior against Goliath, and whichever nation lost would remain a slave to the other. Goliath was about 9 feet tall, and he had been in the army since he was a young child. Israel had no such equivalent. David heard the challenge with Goliath had apparently been battling for 40 days. And he also heard that King Saul offered a great reward to the one who would go against Goliath. David volunteered. Have you ever volunteered for something impossible? I'm not talking about something that was just difficult or time-consuming or something that required patience, but I'm talking about something that seemed flat out impossible. What David did, because David believed God had his hand on him and all of Israel. But listen to the reaction of David's older brother. Boy, are you crazy? Go back to the field and tend to your father's sheep. You're nothing but a cocky brat, and you just want to see the battle. And listen to what King Saul said. Don't be ridiculous. How can a boy like you fight a man like him? You see, but when God chooses to lead, when God chooses someone to lead his people, the naysayers are the first ones to speak up. You can't do it. It's too hard for you. You just want to be the boss. But beloved, the Davids of the world specialize in the impossible because God is on their side. So David, the youngest and the smallest of Jesse's boys, volunteered to go out and do the impossible. But there's another detail that we can't afford to miss. David would not do it his way, but he was only going to do it God's way. You see, Saul gave David a bronze of armor to wear and a coat of metal, but then he strapped the sword to David's shoulder, and David couldn't move. So David shared the armor in favor of doing it God's way. You see, Saul put his trust in the armor, but David put his trust in God. His only tool for battle against the impossible was a stick and a few stones. What could God hope to gain by sending a young anointed king into battle against a giant with nothing more than a slingshot? Well, I'm glad you asked. God proves his power by doing the impossible. Victory is often not in the apparatus, but it's in the architect. For David, it was not in the metal, but it was in the master. You know the rest of the story. David slew Goliath, and though it would not be the last time that David would have to fight against the Philistines, God would be with David every step of the way. Why? Because David trusted in the Lord.